Hello and welcome. This is Tracy Z.
And this is Fred for the fifth time tonight.
Well, if you're just joining us on the replay, we had a few technical difficulties. We're good now.
And if you are watching this the next day, then we had no technical problems whatsoever.
Everything was great. Today, we're going to talk about the 10 keys to quoting. And we've had a lot of inspiration from you guys lately because we are sending in deals to quote and we're talking about what to do with them and what's a competitive offer. And sometimes during summertime, we start to see a slowdown. It's pretty normal in the note business in the summer, right? The dog days of summer.
Yep.
And so far, knock on wood, we did that earlier.
That didn't work.
That didn't work. We haven't seen as much of that. Now, maybe July, August, that's when it really starts sometimes to kick in. But we think people are really motivated right now to get some pricing on their notes, just everything going on in the world, inflation, raising interest rates, and all those things. And there is a lot going on in the world. And today we're just going to focus on the things that we can control, which is our note business.
Which is not technology. All right, so we're going to jump into the screen share here real quick and go from there. So we'll get the screen up. And as soon as you can see that, probably about 10 seconds here, you should be able to see a PowerPoint. And we made it this far before, and we're hoping that we continue to make it going forward. So right now, at least in a second or two, you should see the full screen of the cover slide of 10 keys to quoting.
Still hear us and still see us.
And if you can still hear us and still see us, we have already gone leaps and bounds up here. So let's start. Let's start with what we're going to go over today.
Yeah, so in the quoting process, this is a whole process, and we're going to go through 10 steps. And I really love a process. You know, I love a good process, a good checklist.
You do.
It's what enabled me to manage 50 people when I bought for the institutional side and train them and help them know what they're supposed to do next. So you're going to need personally quotes on a couple of different situations. The first time you're going to need quotes is when you're referring note for a fee. You're going to, you might not have capital of your own. It might not be a note you want to purchase yourself. And so you're going to go to another investor. And this is the process that you're going to follow to get a quote from them and then take something off and earn a fee. But that's not the only time that you might be out searching for a quote. Yep.
So you're also, if you're going to sell notes that you own, and sometimes we've talked about where you do it to recapitalize, or maybe you want to, sell the note for another reason. That would be another time that you would package your own note and send it out for a quote to see what someone will pay for it.
Yeah, and you might just be curious as interest rates are changing out there and cost of funds are changing what somebody might purchase your note for. And so there might be certain notes you do want to recapitalize. And then the third reason is you might be gathering comparables when you're pricing out a note that you plan to buy now, and you're just wanting to know, are you close in the market? What is the market out there? So those are the three main reasons that you would do a quote. The process is a pretty straightforward process, but it has a lot of steps.
Well, 10 of them. 10 steps.
10 to be exact.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we're going to go we're going to go through all of these. Then we're actually going to show you them on an actual deal at the very end.
Yeah. So we'll cover them like Fred said, and then we'll apply it to a deal. So step one, this is near and dear to your heart.
Yep. I love this part. This is basically, obtain info to complete the worksheet. So you're just going to fill out the worksheet. And this is when someone calls you or you have someone that's going to sell a note. The very first thing you're going to have on the worksheet, because again, we're going to send this on to a funder for a pricing. You're going to have your contact info. And typically that's at the very top.
Yes. And this is interesting. This might seem obvious, but when you're filling it out for yourself, when you're on the phone, you might put the seller's contact information on there. But when you get ready to fill it out, check your numbers, as we'll talk about, and send it into an investor, you want your contact information up there. Yes, you may give them the seller's contact information down the road when the seller says yes and you get an option signed. But to start out, you want to be the point of contact. You don't need to share the seller's information. Most investors are very honest and they wouldn't go around you. But why they could accidentally reach out to them because they didn't realize that it was you instead of them they were supposed to contact. So remember to put your contact info at the top.
I did the first one, but okay. Property details. So this is where you're going to put the information on, is it a single family residence? Is it multifamily? How many bedrooms, how many baths? You're going to put, any details about the property that you can think of, any notes about the property.
Yeah, and we'll go over the worksheet here in a second.
Yeah.
You'll see, you want to definitely define whether it's land or residential, if it's owner occupied, if it's rented, if it's commercial, if it's got a mobile home on it, all those good things. Then there's a section for sale information, the terms of the note, all very important, and the payer information.
Yep. Servicing, if there is a servicing coming, working on it, any prior mortgage info. Also, that in that category could be if there's an underlying mortgage in there, you can make note of that. You don't have to make note of that on a quote stage because it's typically a paid out of proceeds. It is important, though, if you're going to be going for partials, because people don't know how to price a partial if they don't know there's an underlying mortgage being paid off.
Yeah, very true. So there is a quote request worksheet. I know it's a little bit hard to see on the screen, but don't worry, you've got downloads available in your member area. And of course, we'll put them in the show notes, and you're probably all familiar. This quote request worksheet we still use. I know that this looks like an old school quote request worksheet. That's because it's been around since our Metro days in the late 80s, right?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
So some people I've seen take this and put it into a different format, and that's fine as long as you make sure that you've got all the information there.
Yeah, usually what I do is I have 2 copies of this. So this is the copy they're looking at that I'm playing with when I'm talking to the seller, because it's got their information and everything on there at the top, and I put everything in there. And then what I did is I made a second copy where I take off the top of it and I change it, and I actually put my logo at the top, my company name, my contact information.
Exactly. So we'll go through all of this, but you can see the different sections that we just talked about: the contact info, the real estate info, description of the property, that historical information, which is talking about the sale when the note was created, then the actual note information, and all the other things we talked about. Prior mortgage, that means that the seller still owes money. That means it was some kind of wrap. And if you know the payer information, if not, then you can leave that blank, and any information you have about the seller. So the first thing when I'm talking after, as Fred pointed out very well, at the last meeting, I have been guilty of doing this while I'm talking to someone on the phone. And Fred brought up in the communication guide with the note seller to stay 100% focused and engaged while you're talking to them, because it's easy if you're distracted and looking things up online to miss something the seller says or sound distracted. Now, they may not be able to see you being distracted, but we all know that feeling when you're talking to someone and they're looking at their phone. So you don't want to give the seller that feeling. If you do say, "Oh, what's the address? Let me look up a picture of it," let them know you're doing that at that point in time. But the rest of this, you're not going to want to do while they're on the phone.
Yeah, and you can think you're doing it covertly, but you can hear the person typing.
Yeah.
You don't know if they're on Facebook. You don't know what they're doing. So basically, you want to give it 100%. But, after you get off the phone call, this is the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to type in that address. You're going to look at it. You're going to look at Google Maps and see what's there and check the address and see if that just shows up. It's not a deal killer if it doesn't, but, it should.
Yeah.
Google's pretty good now.
If it's a residential property or a commercial. And then once you get that, you're going to download and save a photo. Now, at this point in time, you've had some really great communications with the seller. And I want to back up 1 second. And we have a whole video on this, Fred does, on gathering information. So while you're gathering the information, you're not just going through each line by line. You're keeping it very conversational. And we talked a lot about that in the last video as well. But make notes on the back, something personal about the seller. And so that's a whole art in and of itself. So we don't want to gloss or skip over that. I want to make sure that everybody knows that that's an important integral part. This is more the process of how you go about getting the quotes after you've done all of that.
Yep. Step 3. So you're going to want to view the tax record. And a lot of these are online, not all of them. But you have a pretty
Probably
good
95%.
Yeah, you have a pretty good shot of seeing what the tax record is on the property.
So you're going to go to Google or your favorite search engine, and you're going to go perform an online search using county and the state, followed by the words tax assessor. So you're looking for the tax assessor's office, usually different than the tax authority. That's usually, sometimes at the same site, sometimes not, but you're looking for that assessor's record. And you can usually have an option to search by the address of the property, the owner's name, or the parcel number. So you may or may not have all of those things, but hopefully you'll have one. They're a little particular about how you do that. So if you're having troubles, leave off the street name or leave off the first name. All of those things are tips. You have to play around with it a little bit to be able to find it. And then once you've done that, save the tax assessor's property profile. You can usually download it or save as a PDF or print as a PDF. And when I am doing this, I create a little file on my desktop and I'm just saving that picture in there. I'm saving that printout from the tax assessor's office. I'm looking to see, does the owner that the seller has said is the buyer, is that really on there? Is it still a seller's name? That might indicate it's a contract for deed. I'm looking to see if it's got a link over to the last sale, like the last deed. I'm trying to confirm what kind of property it is. Did they say it was a single family residence, but it's really a mobile home? If it's acreage, how much acreage is there? I'm trying to gather all these things that the seller may or may not say. Mm-hmm. And depending on the county, I'm looking for what is the tax assessed value. Now, a lot of counties,
it's going to be
lower value. Yeah. Than what the actual fair market price is, especially right now.
And it's not a red flag if it does show lower. It's just a bonus if it shows what it's worth.
Yeah. So you want to view that tax record and save that property profile. And if it's easily seen there, they may also show the status of the taxes. Are the real estate taxes paid current or are they delinquent? That will get checked for sure later. So don't get hung up if you have troubles figuring that out right now. But that was a bonus if you could see that in there. Mm-hmm. So that's step 3.
Yep. Step 4 is basically you're in an online value check. And we know everything on the internet is 100% accurate. So take this with a grain of salt because you're going to go look at a variety of tools, Zillow, Trulia, Redfin, Renometer. You're going to look at these to get an idea. Now, this does not take the place of an appraisal if you're buying this note for yourself. This does not take the place of a BPO, which is a broker price opinion that's actually kind of like a mini appraisal, where a realtor typically does it like a realtor opinion, that they do it with actual comps and things like that. But this is a warm fuzzy to kind of go look at it, as opposed to the tax assessor, which is typically lower. These guys generally, we've seen Zillow's got in trouble for overinflating things and stuff like that, but it will give you a ballpark of what you think the value might be. And, if you're dealing with a note that's been around for a while, it's not weird for the property to have gone up in value. And you basically look, does that seem to have made sense? And particularly right now, a lot of property's gone up.
So you're looking for a value. Now, if it's a recent sale, you're probably just going to stick with the sales price. But if it's been a couple of years and you can substantiate the value's gone up, then you're going to want to pick a number with some comps, potentially, if you need a higher value to get a higher price, to have your quote based on that. And we'll talk a little bit about how to work that, how to be careful with that. So that's what you're trying to do, some preliminary analysis on the value check. And we like to check Rentometer also because that tells you what that kind of a property rents for. And generally, as investors, we like to see that if they can, if they're buying a home for the same price they're renting for, they'd much rather, that's a big motivation for them to stay in the property. Mm-hmm. So once you've done that, you're going to attempt to get the initial documents. Now, this has been a point of contention since we started in the 80s.
Yes. Yes.
There's some investors that say if they don't have copies of the note and the document, no quote. That has really loosened up over the years. So lots of people will give what we call soft quotes without copies of the documents, subject to review the documents. If the seller won't give you a copy of the document, then the next thing to do is to go online and try to get copies. You're not probably going to get a copy of the note because most states don't record the note, but most states record the mortgage or the deed of trust, maybe the contract for deed. So if they don't give those to you, at least try to go get a copy of that mortgage or deed of trust online, and we'll talk about how to be able to do that. But if the seller will give you copies of documents, starting out, you're just looking for these 3, a copy of the note, copy of the document that gives you the lien, and if possible, a copy of that closing statement or HUD-1 settlement, because that'll show important things like down payment and whether there's a prior title policy and all kinds of good things. This day and age, you don't usually get all this up front when you're quoting.
Yeah. So the way it started is that there was a trend, and this was, of course, the 90s, that a lot of us tested a no note, no quote is what we said. So basically, if the seller wasn't willing to go through the effort of sending us a copy of the note and the closing statement, then we weren't going to quote the note, which was tough to do. The problem with that is that, and it wasn't necessarily you couldn't get it, because a lot of times the sellers go, well, just give me a price before I go, go through my safety deposit box, or I get all this other stuff. You had a lot of lines you could use to try to get it. Go, you know what? I used to blame it on attorneys. I used to say, you know what? Attorneys all write notes differently. I just want to make sure that it's a standard verbiage, things like that. But this is really a step for getting a quote. This is easy to be a subject to. You told me the payment was this. You told me you sold it for this, and you got this much down payment. This is an easy one to just go, you know what? Subject to all these numbers being correctly, this quote will be good. So these are all verification things. If you can get them up front, or if you can find them online, great. If you can't, I wouldn't not continue on to the steps, because this is all going to be a subject to. And by the way, if someone says they sold it for $100,000 and there was a $20,000 down payment, and then you actually eventually get a hold of the closing statement and that's not the case, you have a reason to go back and change it. You have a reason to change the quote if you need to.
So you have a much more motivated seller if they'll give you copies of documents. And you also have a much more opportunity to be accurate in your pricing when you get quotes.
I'm going to agree with the second one. I did not find statistically it closed more deals. The idea was the motivated seller, and I think they are. But then sometimes I get nervous. Someone's got access to that stuff. Like, did they send it out to a bunch of other people too?
That's true.
But it's always better to get the documents than it is not.
And if they won't give you the documents, that's okay. I want you to at least go online and look for the county tax recorder. So you do the county and the state, and you do the recorder, or sometimes it's clerk of records, and you can search for the name, and usually you can at least get a copy of the mortgage or the deed of trust. Mm-hmm. So at least try to do that, and we'll show you how to do that in our sample mm-hmm. deal. So if you have the documents or you have a basic copies, just go through and verify the numbers. Even if you don't have documents, just make sure the numbers make sense. So what kind of numbers are we talking about to be sure that they make sense?
Well, you're looking at the sales price. So if somebody says, I sold it for $124,000 and there's a $30,000 down payment, you have a $94,000 loan. So you're looking to make sure what they sold it for minus the down payment equals the note amount. If it doesn't, then why?
Yeah. It could be that there's a second lien, or they did
sweat equity.
There's all kinds of different reasons. So,
and it usually does. They're usually right. Does.
You want to know is the original terms. So if they say there's 360 months or 30 years or 240 months, 20 years, that makes sense. So you want to take your balance and your interest rate and the payment amount and solve for N and see if that original term makes sense. So we have a whole training, how to calculate cash flow notes, that you have access to, that you can learn how to do those, or you can use the T-value. You get a free copy of that as a member. So whatever your favorite financial calculator is, or T-value, you want to make sure these numbers make sense. The investors really appreciate that you take time to do this.
I was going to say, and that is something I usually do on the phone. If you feel comfortable enough with the calculator that once you've written down those things while they're talking, just plug in don't worry, not necessarily calculate current balance on the fly, but definitely go, hey, I did a 30-year note for $100,000 and there's the payment amount. And the interest rate, I will throw that in the calculator room on the phone, because it's easy to catch right there. If they think the payment's $500, but they're really mailing them $400 or something like that, you have a chance to address that right then and there.
Yeah, then you want to make sure that the balance that they told you is the current balance makes sense based on the number of payments made. I had somebody when we were quoting recently ask, why do you do that? And you want to know, are they paid ahead? That's great. That's a positive if they're paying extra and the balance is like lower than it should be based on amortization. Or you want to know if they're paying behind. So if the balance is higher than it should be on amortization, that might be because they've missed payments or got behind and it's been modified. So you're looking to catch those kinds of things because the investor is going to ask those questions, and you never want to be, caught unaware. It's okay if you are once in a while, but this just elevates your credit to them, your knowledge, when they do this and they see that your quotes are right. Also, they're usually ones they'll grab first and start quoting first because they know they're not going to be a train wreck of trying to figure out the numbers. So it really does make a difference to have a good reputation with the investors.
And the remaining term based on the current balance interest rate. So this shows how many more payments they have left. Usually when you're talking to a seller and you go, how long do you know how many payments they still owe you or whatever, usually they know that. Not always, but if they don't, you're definitely going to just cross-check those numbers. And like Tracy said, neatness counts. I mean, the more information, when I used to buy a lot from people that were flipping notes, I would literally have a stack on the fax machine, and I went for the people that were neat.
Cool.
And when I talked earlier about, 2 worksheets, the reason I also had a second worksheet is typically the one that I was filling out on the fly wasn't as neat. I mean, it was written down there, but the second one that I was sending on to an investor or a funder for investment, I rewrote it. So everything was very neat, very clear.
And if you take the extra time to actually type it, if you have bad handwriting, that's plus 2. Yep. I do that. I have really bad handwriting. So I have one that I fill out on the fly, and then we'll go in and put it in typed format, or you can put it into an email depending on, or your investor might prefer that you submit it to them online via their website. But all these things you want to have. Now, if you want to include a copy of the amortization, you can. It's not required, but just go through and double check those numbers. And then the last calculation I like to do, they're going to do this themselves, but I like to check the loan to value. So I take the balance divided by the sales price. Or if I feel like the pricing is going to get hurt because of the LTV and I feel like I can substantiate a higher value, then I will use a higher estimated value and ask them to use that in the quote. That's where you've got to be careful because it's going to have to come in at that value. So you don't want to pick a value much higher than you need because that means they might come back and give you a lower quote. So use that tactic carefully. But right now in this market, a lot of properties have gone up in value. So it's pretty safe to do that if you need to. If you don't need to, if they've got more than 20% equity based on the sales price, I don't usually use that technique. But if they have less than 20% equity and it really can justify that higher value.
And this is an important one when you're dealing with a seller that is insistent that the value is much higher. So again, let's just take 100,000 and they say, hey, it's worth 200,000 now. You can say, look, I can base it on there, but how confident are you that it's worth 200,000? And the reason I do that is that if it comes back and it's only worth 120, if that changes the numbers, I have something to talk about because they're the one that told me it's worth 200,000 and it turns out it's not. I have something to help, change that quote that nobody's surprised.
So that brings us to step 7. You're ready to submit to the investor. So we recommend that you pick 3 potential investors from the note buyers directory. Do not do the shotgun approach where I've seen this and it drives me up the wall, where people will send it to 20 investors and they'll BCC, blind CC, or they don't blind CC and you see all the other investors' emails on there as well. So pick 3, match what you think is the best investor with that note. And you can use that by looking at your note buyers directory. We list some comments in there. Or if you're not sure, you can submit a ticket to the help desk and ask us what we think. But you start with 3.
Yeah, I can tell you if I get an email of a note that you have the blind CCs in there and I see that you submitted it to 20 other people, I'm deleting the email. Yeah. I'm really not going to bother.
Yeah. It's frustrating, right? So pick the best 3. Now, if those don't come back good or high enough, then or somebody says, I don't want that deal, then yeah, pick another investor to send it to as well. So I like to do a little cover letter. It doesn't have to be long, but I just like to say a few things that I like to highlight about the deal. You've got the worksheet. That may be the worksheet that you've created, or it may be through their online website, depending on the investor.
Yeah. Photo of property. Remember, you already grabbed a photo. If you found a more recent photo, great. Maybe you found a better photo when you were looking on Zillow or one of those other places. But if you have particularly on a recent sale, a lot of times, they tend to pick those up. Definitely put the photo of the property in there.
And then remember, you went to the county and you grabbed that tax assessor's profile about the property. So include that as well.
And if you have copies of the docs, if you actually have copies of the docs, you can put those in. I would say that's almost optional, but it certainly makes you look more professional when you're submitting a package that, you know, they have less to worry about. They're looking at everything right there. It looks like a complete package. Like I said, neatness counts, you know, being thorough counts.
Yeah, and the reason you want to include a copy of the document, even if it's from the county, is some of the investors, like First National Acceptance, will do a soft credit pull as long as they got a copy of something.
Yep.
And so they can do a soft credit pull, and they, even if they don't know the social security number, sometimes they can find it just a hit off of the address and the name, and they're comfortable doing that. And that makes a big difference of how accurate your quote is going to be. Because if your quote is based on not knowing credit, there's probably a 90% likelihood when credit is known that your quote's going to change. And if your quote is received knowing about credit, they've done that soft pull because you provided a copy of the document, then you're only having to make sure that the value comes in and the document package is there. So whenever possible, provide some copy of a document.
Yeah, and like Tracy said, what it is if you're an investor, it gives you a reason to. So if you can't just randomly pull someone's credit.
Right.
You have to have a legitimate reason. And so by having a copy of the doc shows intent of someone selling that asset, which gives you a reason to do that credit pull. So if you don't have that, chances are no one's really going to pull credit on that.
So submit that to the investor, and that's going to be the difference between a soft quote and a firm offer. And so usually if they pulled credit, that's a firm offer subject to value and documentation. If they don't have documents, it's a soft quote subject to review of credit and all of the other things. So that's a really important distinction.
Someone said, would you do an intro letter to a few investors when you're starting out, like myself, a good way to break the ice? Sure, you could. I would just do it on your first deal. You know,
if you haven't done any deals and you don't have a deal to submit, you can try to contact them and introduce yourself. Just know they're so busy. And so they definitely will stand up and pay attention when you've got a deal to quote. But don't get discouraged if you're trying to introduce yourself before you have a deal. Some companies like First National Acceptance, they're good. They want you to download the broker package. They want to assign a rep to you and you can ask questions. So it kind of depends on the investor. Sure, go for it. It's like Fred said, though, it may be that you're going to get their attention when you actually send the deal into quote.
Well, and I also got to tell you, if you submit a deal with these steps, I'm not going to think you're new. Yeah. I'm not going to think you're just starting out.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, because you're doing all the things you're supposed to do. Yeah. You're doing exactly what I do when I submit deals for quotes. So when
you get a quote,
yay!
If it's something, when you have a quote, now you have the ability to go back and make an offer. So it's always good to offer more than one option. So a lot of people selling always want just the full. So you're going to want to offer a full and a partial if you can.
Yeah, so you're going to get some different ones back. And so you're going to take the best full offer and the best partial offer. They don't have to be from the same company, right? No. But you want to take the best full and the best partial. And then you want to deduct your fee from that.
This is important.
Very important.
Because I've seen people add their fee and then it doesn't work. So you basically take the funder's offer and take off the amount of money that you want to make, and you make that offer to the note holder.
Yeah.
And it's 3 to 6%. Sometimes when you get to a smaller note, you're really just saying, look, I'm going to make $1,200, and then it ends up being a little bit higher percentage or whatever it is. You know, that's just kind of a range. If you're ever in question of how much you think you should take off, contact one of us and we'll tell you exactly what we would have done.
And then deduct any costs that you're going to pay that aren't covered by the investor. So if you are getting a retail quote or a wholesale quote, this will be different. So wholesale means it's a gross offer and the costs are going to be paid by you as the referring finder or the seller. That's what wholesale is. If it's retail, it means it's a net offer. That means that note buyer investor is going to pay all the costs. So you don't have to worry about deducting any costs. And companies like First National Acceptance, they do retail. They pay all the costs. And if you're new, that makes life a lot easier. If it's wholesale and you or the seller are going to pay costs, then you've got to factor in title and appraisal and closing. And we do have a link that gives you some estimates of standard costs, but it really varies by state. So you have to be careful on that if you're quoting them wholesale.
Yeah, and sometimes if they come back with a wholesale scenario, you have to look at what the difference in price is, because you know you're going to cover those costs. So am I willing to risk, you're going to do it in stages, but am I willing to risk an appraisal cost to get this much money? If it's not much more money, then you're going to go retail. Now, if you're dealing with a situation where the seller is insistent on a value being higher and it's imperative to getting the deal at the amount that they want, it's not impossible for the fund to go, okay, but you're going to be responsible for the appraisal. And then at that point, you decide, do you want to absorb that risk or do you want to pass that on to the seller? I normally don't pass on anything to the seller. I normally assume the risk. It's hard to do. Have done it a couple times and done it successfully, but it's very rare.
And you'll get some investors that do a mix between wholesale and retail. They'll say, we'll pay for the BPO or the value check, but we won't pay for title. So then it becomes really important to get a copy of that closing statement to see if there's an existing lender's title policy, because that will save a lot. It could be the difference between, spending $200 for title versus $1,200 for title. So those are just some different tips. So if you get in that situation where it's not retail and it's wholesale and you're not sure what to do, that's a good time to reach out to us on the help desk. So then you're going to make your offer to the seller. Yeah, so you've deducted your fee, you know who's going to pay costs, and you're going to make your offer to the seller.
Yep. So contact the seller, call them up and know what it is. And again, follow it up in writing. Always provide it in writing. Even if they accept, then the offer letter, which we're going to go into in a second, is really you're following up in writing. But if they say no, you're going to follow it up with writing and tell them what you can pay.
Yeah, and it's always good to call them first, because then you can answer any questions. You can continue to build rapport. If they're an email person, you might have responded back email. But as Fred said, whether they say yes or no, you still want to provide that offer in writing. Yeah,
you really want to be on the phone with them because you really want a chance to put them at ease on what some of their concerns might be. Like they might not know that they can close it outside. So look, you're not going to have to give up your note until a third party's actually collected all the money. Much like a real estate closing. So there's a lot of chance to address some of those housekeeping issues at that point. So even if you've contacted them via email, I would say, great news, got an offer to go over with you. When's a good time to talk? And I probably wouldn't send that in email unless I really, really had to without talking to them.
Yeah, totally agree. So we do have a sample offer letter. It's in the member area and we'll attach it as well. But this offer letter is simple, one page. It outlines just the one full offer, the one partial offer, and what the next steps are. And then you sign that, and that can be sent via email. If somebody uses snail mail still, obviously you're trying not to take too long to get it to them. But this is after you've had the phone conversation. Mm-hmm. And then you want to follow up with them.
So, follow up with the seller and let them know what's going on, usually every week, just to keep them on, what stage we ordered the appraisal. We're waiting on the appraisal to come in. Hey, okay, now, next conversation, appraisal came in. It's good. We're, drafting documents. We're doing whatever.
Yeah. So that's once they've accepted. Keep following up until they accept. So once they accept, then you're going to take that offer letter and you're going to send them the formal option agreement. And that formal option agreement is still one page, but it's a little bit more formal. It gives you an actual option. The option agreement is for 90 days. If they want 60 days, it's easy to change it. So once they sign that option agreement, then you notify the investor, and then they'll start the due diligence phase. And you continue, just like Fred was saying, following up all through the process, not just following up to get them to a yes, but following up all through the process. Yeah, that's very important in keeping your seller as part of the process. So once that's accepted and they start doing their due diligence, then the funder will tell you all the things they need. I like to stay involved through the whole process. I don't like to just turn over my sellers to the investors because nobody minds the deal, I think, like I do. So I can encourage you to stay involved, and you'll learn a lot through the process as well. And we have a sample of the option agreement in there as well. Yeah, so we'll go through this option agreement here in a little bit.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll actually walk through the option agreement with the seller because they might have some questions. Some sellers might say, hey, I want my attorney to take a look at it. Say, absolutely. Don't try to talk them out of it. Honestly, for every seller that has said, I want my attorney to take a look at it, and I say, absolutely. If you have any questions or you want your attorney to look at it. 9 out of 10 don't bother taking to their attorney because they don't want to pay for them. But if they have any questions on the option agreement, you want to be there to kind of walk them through.
And remember, one important thing about that option agreement, and we'll look at that in a sample transaction, is that option agreement is between the seller of the note and you. You're not buying the note. I know you're referring it in this situation, but still the option agreement is with you as the purchaser. And there's a clause in there that we'll look at in a minute that says you have the right to buy it or to assign it to another investor. And so at closing, all the documentation, the purchase agreement, which is a much more formal 5-page document usually, and the assignments and the note endorsements, all of that will go to the investor at closing. But at this initial stage, you're controlling the option because you may choose to take it to one investor or another investor if something doesn't work out with that investor. So you're in control of the deal, very important. The next thing we want to talk about is to apply all these steps to a sample transaction. This is a transaction that came in and from a referral party that had several notes that they had created seller financing on, and they said they were all land notes and they wanted me to quote them. And it was a professional referral. And so this is a sample of one of them. And they were a lot of land notes and mobile home and land, as it turned out. And so we would buy some of these ourselves, but some of them we would refer on to an investor. So I went through these 10 steps on this transaction just recently, so I thought it'd be a fun one to share. So it's impossible to see a quote request worksheet small. So we're going to go through each steps and we're trying to blow it up so that you can actually see it. So this is the worksheet, and you can see that it was on Whippoorwill Road in Conroe, Texas. And it was sold for $124,000, and we used $124,000 sales price. I thought it was too aggressive to think that that land, 4.35 acres of vacant land, had gone up too much, and I didn't need the extra value, as you'll see. So I just played it safe and went with the sales price because I didn't need the extra value. This one's interesting because for the life of me, I could not get it. Formal address, but I could get the tax assessor's information, and I was able to find the listing on the MLS. So I was able to pull up a picture, but sometimes, you know, it says right in the county tax records, they hadn't assigned a formal number to it yet. So, yep. So I included a link to the tax profile as well on there. You want to go over the numbers?
Yeah, I mean, you can see them on the screen here, but basically, this is where Tracy put in all the numbers for this. So they have the sales price of $124,000, $30,000 bond payment, $94,000. This is where we check those numbers to make sure that makes sense. The term was 180 months, so Tracy was able to calculate at 8% what the payment should be and what the remaining balance would be along the way, and when the next payment due was. And that's what you always want to ask them what that's going to be also.
And I'm gonna show you something I did. I fixed it before, and the term in months was actually, I think, 240, not 180. I saw and I fixed it, and see, this is why you do that. So 94,000 at 8% at 786.25. I had an old slide deck, I think. Yes, the term in months is 240, and I actually changed it before I sent it to the investor, and I actually changed it in the slide deck, and I pulled up the old slide deck. So there you go. That's why you do it. So the term in months is 240, and 17 payments were made. And there's 223 left, and the balance was 91,137. And we had the borrower's name, and we knew the seller was doing this to recapitalize. And this was a retail quote. And so we looked up the address and were able to get a photo. And as I mentioned, it was a funky address, but there was a photo. And I went to the Montgomery County, Texas tax site by searching for that. And this is a copy of the tax assessor's value. And you can see that it is 4.35 acres. Yep.
And you can see the value is listed much higher at 163, but we're not even using that value, nor do we need that value for the quote. But, you know, Tracy put it at the top of the worksheet, even though we were stating a lower value. So that makes whoever's looking to buy it a lot more comfortable.
Yeah. And then we did an online value check. It was a little harder to do that on this one because it's land, but there were other land comps in the area, and we could pull up the listing from the MLS and get a little bit of details on there as well. And then we pulled up other land sales in the area. Then I went to Montgomery County records, and I searched the public records because this seller didn't want to be bothered to send over all the copies of the documents yet. And I knew I wanted to get a copy of whatever I could. And so I was able to go onto the county website and search, and I could find that deed of trust that was recorded, and I was actually able to pull it up, download it.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! So I actually got a full copy of the 8 pages of the deed of trust right by going to the county. And because I had that, that means that they were able to do a soft pull when they did the quote. So I went through all of these different numbers, and that's when I noticed that my term in months original term was supposed to be 240, not 180. And I fixed it on my worksheet. I just forgot to fix it on my slide. But that's why you do that, because sometimes you'll be writing down numbers, or the reason I made a mistake on this one was I had just done a deal that had 180 months, so I hadn't fixed it. So you want to do sales price minus down payment equals the first lien. So we had the 124 minus the 30 equaled 94. We knew that the term was 240, not 180. We double checked the current balance. That was accurate on an amortization. We made sure the remaining term based on the current balance was right. So we knew it was 223 months, and they'd made 17. And I did the loan to value, which was 91,137 divided by the 124 was a 74% loan to value. That's using the lower value. So that's all those numbers that we just verified. And this was the quote that came back. This was the best quote that came back. I figured that this would be the best quote. And First National Acceptance came back and they said they would do a full buyout for $82,000, or they would buy 130 months for $63,000. And they would start with the September payment, even though the payment was next to due July. They would start with the September payment. Somebody asked us the other day, they said, does First National make you wait until then to close? And no, they don't. No. They will close as soon as the file is ready to close. They just allow the seller to collect those payments. They do their pricing based on that. And the reason they do that is then they don't get in the situation where they have to lower the pay price because all these payments came in. Now, for some reason, this deal closed past September, then they would have to. But different investors do it differently. And this is just how First Nationals decided they would do it. They just bump it forward 2 months because they think, well, maybe it'll take that long to close, and we just want to make sure we don't have to keep adjusting the price. It actually is beneficial because the seller gets to keep some payments, and you don't have to change their price on them when they get those payments. They based it on property value at the sales price or higher, and they actually did a soft credit pull and reviewed it, and it was good. So that's a pretty solid quote. I'd say that's a firm offer subject to value and title checking out. So now step 8, we're going to deduct our fees.
So the full buyout from FNAC was $82,000. We took off a fee of $2,459.71. So the offer to seller was $79,540.29. Now, if you know anything about prior how to make an offer and how to do things like that, we'll never do a round number. So we wouldn't take off $2,000 and offer them $80,000 even. You might nudge it a little bit more or less depending on what you want to do, but basically you want to give them a number all the way to the penny so that it's less likely to have them counter with another number. Yeah,
if you really wanted to make this one a little skinnier, since it's a retail offer, there's no cost, you could bump it up to $80,040.29 because then you'd haven't crossed that next threshold, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times we get a lot of questions on, well, how do you make offers on the partial? Well, they gave a partial for 130 months and they offered $63,000. So whatever they're offering, you take your fee off of that. I traditionally take higher fees on partials.
You can, because there's going to be a returning balance. So this one, the offer was $63,000 for the 130 months, took off $37.79. So the offer to seller is $59,220. But remember, that's not all they're going to get. They're going to get the note back, which they could sell another partial or keep the payment. So they're selling a lot more interest up front. So it's easier to, traditionally, almost always in a partial, you can get a bigger fee.
And we make sure we point that out when we make the offer to them. What is the balance at the time of reassignment? So the seller doesn't see. This is off on the side. These are your own notes. Really make sure you deduct your fee. Make sure that you highlight the number that you're telling the seller on your worksheet. Because when they call in, it's really easy to accidentally grab the number the investor gave you. And the first time you do that, you won't ever do it again.
That's true. That's true.
So this is a sample of how to make an offer to the seller. You can verbally say this. It's nice to, when you're first starting out, to know what you're going to say. Then this also goes into the offer letter. So I like to say, hey, thanks for the chance to review your note. We're making these quotes. Next payment due September. That means you're going to get good news. You get to keep those payments until then. We can offer several options for the purchase of the note. The first one is for a full buyout, where we pay $79,540.29 for the right to receive all the remaining payments, and we let that digest. And a lot of times they say, I don't like it, I don't have a discount. Well, it's like, well, good news. If the discount bothers you, we have a second proposal, and that's for a partial purchase.
Yeah, so we would basically say that we have a second option for you and the partial, and what we would do is we would pay $59,220.57 right now for the right to receive the next 130 payments. After that, after we've collected that, the note will be reassigned back to you, and the remaining balance, should all the payments be made, according to the, in a timely manner, according to the plan, to the note, you'll have an approximate balance of $53,513 back to you. You could either sell another chunk of payments, or you could keep it. You could do whatever you want to do. And so what the seller typically does is they mentally add up both those numbers, $59,220 and $53,513, which should be $112,700. I don't know, $112,700, something like that. So they think, wow, I'm getting a lot more.
Because remember, the balance was $91,137. So they're getting money now, and they're getting money later, and that's more than the balance. And that's because they get to keep some of that interest working for them. And so if they don't want to take a discount, it's like, we got an option for you that you can get your money now and later.
Yeah, remember because of time value money, the payments after, every payment we were paying a little bit less for as it went farther and farther away. So by holding on to the back end of those payments for a while and selling them later, they do better.
And so then we just let them know whether they're net offers, and if you're paying the cost, make sure you push that. Hey, these are net offers. All the costs for closing, title, and update, appraisal. All those costs when you bought real estate. None of those are going to be affected.
Yeah, these are net. These are net numbers.
You don't have to pay those.
And that's important, because people that are looking at taking a discount already don't like the fact they have to take a discount. So if you can at least let them know there's not going to be all these extra fees, commissions, whatever at the closing table, that often sways them.
Yeah, and so you just want to say anything that it's subject to, and let them know the next steps. And then if you want, you can put it into the formal offer letter. That's all pretty much there. And if they say yes, then we move to the option to purchase agreement. And it's basically a more formal version of the offer letter.
Yep.
Remember, this is between you and the seller. Once I get to option A, all payments, or option B, the partial, hopefully they've told me whether they want the partial or the full, and I'll take out the option that doesn't apply. I would only do this if I was sending someone an option they hadn't decided yet. But if they've already said, yeah, I want the full, or yeah, I want the partial, then I take out the option that doesn't apply. So you don't have an option A and B, you just have that. And then you say how much you'll purchase it for. And you say number 3, who's going to pay all the costs. Number 4, the seller says they really do own this note mortgage, and then it's not in default. Then number 5 says it's subject to appraisal or BPO, and you say the amount in there. And then 6 gives you some leverage. If they back out and you want to buy the deal, that they have to reimburse costs. Look, it's really hard to enforce this, but it's just nice to have, because it makes them a little bit obligated. 7 just gives you an out if there's anything that the investor doesn't like with the title or the credit, that you have an out. And then 8 is your option. Normally it says 90 days exclusive option, but if somebody asks you to change it to 60, I would. I don't usually like to go to 30. I think 60 or 90 is better.
Yeah, the problem with 30 is that occasionally, if you can't close the deal, sometimes you're dealing with an appraisal that's going to take, almost 2 weeks because it's rural or they're backed up or whatever. And all of a sudden now you're ready to go. You're a week away. You're drafting documents. You hit that 30-day window and they go, you know what? I'm going to try something else. And you did all that work and you paid the appraisals and everything else.
So there's a really important piece in 8 that a lot of people say, I don't like signing this option. And we believe in full disclosure. So if you're not going to buy it, this is the part that says that. It says purchaser, that's you, may purchase the mortgage for his or her own account to hold, or they may resell to an investor. Seller agrees that any purchase and subsequent resale of the mortgage, and if it's a deed of trust, change it to deed of trust, or assignment of this agreement shall not in any way constitute a breach of any duty owed by the purchaser or seller. So that gives you that right. And then at closing 9, that the seller will execute the final documents, the assignment, the endorsement, get you the original note and any other original. So that is it in a nutshell. We've covered a lot in here, haven't we?
Like 10 steps,
10 steps.
I think.
So we definitely want to take any questions and answers that we might have. So we're back on full screen.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! So that is the 10-step process. So if you were going to buy this note for yourself and you were just looking for a comparable, then then you don't submit it to the investor. You do it yourself. I just ask you to do that sparingly. Don't make investors quote a whole bunch of deals if you don't have any plans on ever sending them a deal. But if you do that and you do it sparingly, it's a good way to get comps. And just make sure you send them some deals once in a while as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what kind of questions do we have? Do we have any in there?
We don't have any questions.
Wow. That means we are also thorough.
Or the audio and video went out again. No.
Yeah, so this is just the 10 steps for quoting. If you get stuck on any of these, that's what the help desk is for. I know you're probably tempted to shortcut around some of these steps, but I've been doing it for 30 plus years and I still go through all those steps, just like I showed you on that sample transaction.
Mm-hmm. Pete, how often do people use the fax option?
No, they don't.
Not as
Fred
often.
is dating himself. Nobody faxes.
No.
He's teasing you. Nobody faxes anymore.
Someone else said, I'm still new to this whole thing and believe this session will be great to go through again. Yeah, absolutely. Matter of fact, early on, I think it's the second slide or third slide, excuse me. It has all 10 steps just listed there that broke down. It's all on one sheet. So that's not a bad one to just print out and have it at your desk or wherever sitting on the wall, so you can go, okay, I'm going to make sure I go through all these 10 steps.
Yeah.
I'm a little confused. Let's say FNAC is the end buyer. Why do I need an option agreement? At the end of the day, isn't the deal between FNAC and the seller? It is. However, you want to maintain control. You are the one that is buying the note, and then you're just choosing FNAC. So you want to be in the middle. You could create, have an investor that you're comfortable with and going, hey, I'm just going to send you that person, but then you're not maintaining control anymore. And I wouldn't recommend it for what's a doc that simply already allows you to have an assignment.
Yeah, think of it like wholesaling real estate. So you've got an option to purchase the real estate, and then you assign that option to the end investor. And then at closing, the end investor actually gets the deed to the property, if you're familiar with real estate. That's kind of like the same way this works. You've got an option to purchase the note, and at closing, the investor that means that buying it will get the final purchase agreement. So the final purchase agreement won't be with you and that seller. It'll be with that end investor, and so will the assignment and the note endorsement. I just been doing this a lot of years, and it's better if you stay in control, because what if that investor backs out and you go take it to a different investor?
I was going to say, so remember in the beginning, we had it's not impossible to have a full from one investor and a partial from another. And let's say we all think we're doing the full, and you put them in touch with that fund, and all of a sudden it turns out blows out. And they go, you know what, I'd rather just do the partial. If you had your option agreement, you can take it wherever.
Yeah. So, and most investors out there are very reputable, and they wouldn't try to go around you.
Yeah.
We try to only put the reputable ones in the directory. However, this is your validation that if somebody did try to go around you to the seller directly, that you can show that you have that option on it. So it's just, and you're in the driver's seat at the beginning. We're not doing it we're not dishonest. We're very upfront with the sellers. Like, we buy some notes with in-house funds and we place some notes with outside funds. Our job is to get you the very best price on your note. Some banks out there will buy these, and we have special relationships with them. And so we have special access to that. And so we do what's going to get you the most money. And so that's how we explain that. And I'm happy to tell you when we find out the best offer for you, whether it's with our funds or with outside investment funds, whether we're buying it in-house or placing it outside. Mm-hmm. But don't worry, we'll stay involved the whole way, make sure it's a smooth process. And that messaging we actually did in the last webinar.
And I haven't, sellers just don't have a problem with that when you explain that to them.
Yeah. So, and then it says right in that option agreement that it can be reassigned to a different investor at closing. And so that's usually when we let them know when we're ready to fund. So it's also a good time to reiterate, don't bring up objections that don't exist. I agree. agree.
Because
I'm a little guilty of that.
A lot of people will just ignore that line or not think anything of it or think it's just boilerplate. And so don't bring that up. If no one brings that up to you, then just business as usual.
Don't bring up objections for them. It took me a few years to learn
Sure.
that.
Sure.
Oh, a lot of people said that was a good step-by-step breakdown. Excellent. Good. So thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for bearing with us in the beginning when something was internet gremlins.
And we really appreciate it. And we're here if you have any questions or need any help. And as we end all our sessions,
goodbye.
Happy note investing.
Happy note investing. I know I was going to say that.